Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the guest Fritz refused to serve. At 1:13 on a Tuesday, Fritz Brenner committed his first act of open rebellion in the Wolfe household. He refused to serve lunch. Now, if you've ever seen Fritz in action, you'd know that refusing to serve lunch at 1 o'clock sharp is about as likely as Wolfe deciding to go on a brisk walk down Fifth Avenue. But there he was, in the dining room doorway, white apron flapping like a flag of war, cheeks flushed Swiss red, and both hands planted on his hips. Across from him stood a man who looked like a well-fed bulldog in a dove-grey suit, sweating indignation through every pore. "Sir," Fritz was saying, his accent sharpening each word like a carving knife, "you will not cross that threshold. Mr. Wolfe does not dine with boors." That last word landed like a thrown plate. I'd been halfway through setting the mail in Wolfe's in-basket when the sound of raised voices filtered in. My first thought was that maybe the butcher had sent a substitute cut of veal. My second thought, quickly confirmed when I saw the stranger, was that the day had taken a turn for the worse. The man in grey puffed up, face mottling. "I demand to see Nero Wolfe. I have an appointment," he barked, holding out a handkerchief like it was proof of his credentials. The square of linen bore greasy thumbprints and a smudge of something blue near the corner. Fritz didn't so much as blink. "You may demand from the sidewalk, sir. This is not a stable." I'll hand it to Fritz. He could make contempt sound like a religious rite. Before the fireworks could escalate to actual shoving, I stepped in and made my best peacekeeper face. "Let's all take a deep breath, gentlemen. Fritz, maybe you should check whether Mr. Wolfe is expecting anyone." His glare said that he'd rather check the temperature of hell. Still, he gave me a curt nod and vanished toward the office. The stranger turned to me, panting. "Goodwin, isn't it? Archie Goodwin? I know who you are. My name is Jonas Greel. I'm here on urgent business." He pulled a thick envelope from his breast pocket as though it were the 10 Commandments and tapped it against his palm. "I'm a literary agent. This is about a book, a manuscript that's going to make half of New York society tremble." He leaned close, breath reeking faintly of oysters and arrogance. "Someone's threatened my life because of it." I've had my share of melodrama across that doorstep, but this one had the seasoning of genuine panic underneath the bluster. Before I could prod for details, Wolfe's voice came booming from the office. "Archie, what in the name of sanity is that caterwauling? Is my house a public concourse?" "Depends who you ask," I called back, ushering Greel in. The man waddled after me, huffing. The office looked the same as it always does at 1 o'clock. Wolfe behind the desk like a mountain waiting for erosion, the air faintly aromatic from Fritz's roast duck cooling on the side table, and the delicate sound of order humming through the room. Wolfe's eyes narrowed at the intruder as if measuring him for excommunication. "Mr. Wolfe," Greel began with a self-important bow, "I apologize for the intrusion, but I was told—" Wolfe raised a palm, a slow, imperious stop sign. "You have already intruded. Continue only if necessity justifies it." Greel puffed up again. "Someone wants to kill me. My firm is releasing a memoir, an exposé, by an unnamed author. Chapter 10 concerns powerful men at a private dining club. Last night I received a note. Serve that dish and you'll be served cold. I was advised you might protect me." Wolfe tilted his head. "And by whom were you advised?" "By the same gentleman who suggested your discretion was as famous as your gluttony." That did it. Wolfe's lips thinned, his nostrils flared, and I silently counted the seconds before an eruption. "Sir," he said finally, voice like cracked ice, "I am not a bodyguard, nor am I a receptacle for vulgar rumour. You arrive uninvited during my luncheon hour to insult my household and expect sanctuary. Phooey." He struck the bell cord sharply, and from the hall came Fritz's immediate footsteps. "Fritz, please remove this gentleman from my house." Fritz, regaining his dignity, gave a bow that could have made a diplomat blush. "With pleasure, sir." Greel turned purple. "You'll regret this. The book will mention you, Wolfe, every word." Wolfe merely shifted a finger toward the door. "Then I suggest accuracy, Mr. Greel. Good day." I guided our guest out with a hand at his elbow. He was heavy but soft, like escorting an angry pudding. As I opened the door, the light from the street caught the back of his glove. There, just along the index finger, was a faint smear of blue wax. I recognized it, the same wax Wolfe used for his personal seal, the one that closed his private correspondence and occasionally, when Wolfe wanted ceremony, sealed a particularly fine invoice. "Watch your step," I told Greel as he stomped down the stoop. "These stairs are treacherous for men carrying grudges." He turned to snarl something, but I'd already closed the door. Inside, the office air had grown heavy. Wolfe was seated again, glaring at his plate of duck as if it had betrayed him. "Archie," he said slowly, "was there ever a more odious species than the man who interrupts a meal to parade his importance?" "Possibly," I said, "but they usually don't bring literary credentials." He gave me a dark look. "You find levity in everything." "Not everything," I said, "but I find something curious in that glove. He had blue wax on his hand, from your seal." That brought his gaze up, keen now. "Absurd. No one touches my desk without permission. Not even you." "Then maybe he touched it without permission." Wolfe grunted, half growl, half contemplation. "Phooey, the man is a vulgarian. Forget him." Easier said than done. Around 2:30, after Fritz had finally restored his temper enough to serve what was left of lunch, I caught him glancing toward the office door more than once. When Wolfe excused himself for the plant rooms, I intercepted Fritz in the dining room. "All right," I said. "What gives? You looked ready to throw that duck at the guy's head." Fritz folded his hands, eyes clouding. "Mr. Archie, that man, Jonas Greel, I know him. Years ago, before the war, he came to the Concordia Club. I was chef there. He mocked the kitchen staff. He said no cook was a gentleman, that our place was below the stairs. He called me," he paused, face tightening, "a Swiss scullion." "So when he showed up here, you decided to make it personal?" "I decided," Fritz said, voice trembling just slightly, "that my kitchen would not serve him. Mr. Wolfe understands dignity." I nodded. "Yeah, but he also understands scandal. Next time maybe warn me before you start a revolution." Fritz almost smiled. "There will be no next time, Mr. Archie. Such men are poison." He returned to clearing plates, movements measured, almost ceremonial. I lingered, watching him wipe a spot of gravy that didn't exist. When Wolfe came down from the orchids at 6, I briefed him on Fritz's confession. He listened, silent except for the creak of the chair. Finally, he said, "There is virtue in loyalty, Mr. Goodwin, but indiscretion in vengeance. We shall consider the matter closed unless it reopens itself." I nodded, though something in me doubted closure was on the menu. The wax, the manuscript, the insult, all of it felt like the kind of appetizer fate sends before serving the main course of trouble. I typed up a brief memo noting Greel's visit, the blue wax, and Fritz's connection. Wolfe dictated a final line. "No action warranted." I added my own. "Check back if the boar reappears, alive or otherwise." Wolfe read it, snorted, and reached for his beer, the amber reflection glinting in the lamplight. "Archie," he said, "do you persist in treating every episode as prologue to calamity?" "Only the ones that start with Fritz refusing lunch," I told him. He gave a faint rumble. Could have been amusement. Could have been digestion. Fritz entered with coffee, restored to serenity. The office regained its balance, the storm passing into memory. But when I stacked the outgoing mail later, I noticed one seal stick shorter than before, its blue end freshly nicked. I turned it in the light, then glanced toward Wolfe. "Lose a stick of wax?" I asked casually. Wolfe didn't look up. "No? Why?" "No reason," I said. "Just wondering if our friend Greel had sticky fingers." He didn't reply. He reached for his book, ending the conversation by sheer willpower. I knew better than to press. Still, as the clock neared 7 and the room filled with the smell of coffee and the faint hum of distant traffic, I couldn't shake the image of that smear on Greel's glove. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe, like Fritz said, some men are poison. Either way, I had the uncomfortable feeling that this lunch hour's little drama wasn't finished digesting us yet. At 7:30 that evening, I discovered that secrets travel faster than taxis in Manhattan. I'd gone to check the front hall on account of a draft that shouldn't have been there. Fritz had left the transom open a crack, and found something new resting just inside the door, a blue-sealed envelope, square and smug, as if it had let itself in for tea. The address on it, in neat type, read only, "To the one who keeps secrets." Now, In this house that could mean either Nero Wolfe or Fritz, but the colour of the seal gave it away. Blue wax. Wolfe's from the same stick he used for formal bills, and the rare letter that left this fortress of reason. Only this seal had been pressed clumsily, the edges smeared like a forger's signature. I picked it up gingerly and took it into the office. Wolfe was where he always is at that hour, ensconced behind the desk, breathing symmetry and reading Les Heures du Goût, some French philosopher who thought dining was a moral act. "Interruptions, Archie," he said without looking up, "are permissible only in cases of fire or deceit." "Then this is both," I said, dropping the envelope in front of him. He frowned at the seal, reached for his penknife and slit it open. Inside was half a sheet of paper, typewritten, the top edge jagged from tearing. He adjusted his glasses and read aloud. Chapter 10, The Club Affair, Names Omitted Until Proof Secured. Then softly, "Ah." That's all. Just "ah." I waited for thunder, or at least a phooey, but he just sat there. "That's your wax," I pointed out, "or someone who likes your stationery style." He ran a thumb along the seal, eyes narrowing. "Not mine. A counterfeit. The hue's wrong, too bright, and the impression lacks depth. Someone has gone to laborious lengths to imitate me. Fritz." The door opened instantly, Fritz appearing like a summoned spirit, wiping his hands on a towel. Wolfe gestured toward the envelope. "Explain how such an item could enter my premises unannounced." Fritz stiffened. "No one came, sir. I swear it. I cleaned the vestibule after lunch. The door was locked." Wolfe glowered. "Then it came through keyhole or ether." He turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin, you will ascertain who sent this. Begin with that literary mountebank, Jonas Greel. If he is not already dining on crow, find him and pluck the feathers." So an hour later, I was breathing midtown air thick with typewriter smoke and ambition. The Greel Literary Bureau occupied a narrow floor above a stationery wholesaler on East 48th, 3 doors down from a deli that smelled like boiled despair. The glass on the door read "Authors Represented," discreetly. I pushed in and got hit with the buzz of Remingtons and the sight of 5 women hammering away like stenographic angels fallen to earth. The receptionist, a brisk blonde with lipstick the colour of courage, gave me a look that said she had 5 minutes for life and none for strangers. "Mr. Greel in?" I asked. "Depends who's asking." "Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe." That name got her attention. She straightened, her fingers pausing over the keys. "Mr. Wolfe? The detective?" "He prefers private investigator. But yeah, the sedentary one." "Mr. Greel isn't here," she said quickly. "He went to a meeting uptown after lunch and, well, he hasn't come back." "He usually vanished this long." Her eyes darted toward an inner office. "Not without calling. He was expecting an author this afternoon, a Mrs. Leland, but she left angry." She dropped her voice. "If you're here about that book, I don't know anything." I smiled. "Lady, I'm not even sure what book you're talking about, and already you're confessing." She flushed and began typing furiously, a sure sign she knew more than she wanted to. I leaned against the desk, watching the ribbons blur. "You must type fast when you're nervous," I said. "If charm was speed, you could have written War and Peace before lunch." That cracked the edge of her composure. "Look, Mr. Goodwin, the book's called The Club Affair. Mr. Greel said it would shake the city. He was scared this morning, said someone might stop publication. That's all I know." Her tone was genuine enough to pass inspection, but my instincts were vibrating. The room was full of copy carbons, galleys, and the faint smell of ink and ambition, the odour of secrets waiting for daylight. I asked to step inside Greel's office. She hesitated, then shrugged. "If he finds out, tell him I was out getting paper clips." The office was a cramped den of literary clutter, manuscripts stacked like unfiled crimes, a well-kept Smith Corona with a fresh ribbon, and a row of cheap cigars beside an overflowing ashtray. On the desk sat a half-empty glass of water and a blotter marked with greasy fingerprints. I looked closer. There was another smudge of blue wax. "Well, well," I muttered. I pocketed a photostat of the torn half-page, no evidence theft, just a reference for Wolfe, and jotted the address of the office. When I turned, the receptionist was watching me from the door. "Find what you wanted?" she asked. "I found what I didn't expect," I said. "That happens to me a lot." I tipped my hat and left before she decided to remember anything else. Back on the street, the wind off the river carried a tang of rain and printer's ink. I called the brownstone from a payphone. Fritz answered, formality intact, voice still stiff from the afternoon's drama. "Mr. Wolfe is at his orchids," he informed me. "He said you may leave a message." "Tell him," I said, "that Mr. Greel's office is a hive without a queen, and someone's been sealing letters in his name with Wolfe's own signature perfume." "Perfume?" Fritz asked blankly. "Blue wax," I said, and hung up before he could ask for details. By the time I got back to West 35th, the brownstone was settling into its evening calm. Wolfe was in the office again, the glow of the desk lamp turning his forehead to brass. He looked up as I entered. "Well?" "Greel's missing. His girls are worried. There's wax like yours on his desk, and they're all working on a manuscript called The Club Affair." "Indeed." He closed his eyes a moment. A title suggestive of both food and impropriety. "It's about a dining club, apparently. Scandal chapters and such." Wolfe made a noise halfway between a grunt and a groan. "Bah! Another scavenger among the entrails of the affluent." He motioned for the envelope, studied it again, then leaned back, fingertips steepled. "You perceive, Archie, the peril of my name attached to scurrility. Someone desires to embroil me." "In what? Literary criticism?" "In infamy," he said coldly. "You will watch developments. Mr. Greel's corpse may yet appear." "Thanks for the optimism," I said. "Any particular instructions?" "Yes. Avoid gallivanting before dinner." That was his way of saying he didn't want me out after 7 without permission. "Gallivanting, sir, is my profession." "No," he said, eyes narrowing. "Your profession is to prevent imbeciles from making my acquaintance. You have failed today. Compensate by being vigilant." I bit back a grin. "Sure, boss. I'll keep both eyes peeled and the third half shut." He sighed. "Archie, were irony a substance, you would drown in it." I started for the door. "That's all right. You'd charge me for the rescue." He almost smiled, which for Wolfe is like a public declaration of affection. As I turned out the light, he said, "Mr. Goodwin." I stopped. "Yes?" "Be careful. Whoever imitates my seal has already trespassed once. The next intrusion may be less polite." That was Wolfe's version of "watch yourself." I headed for the hall, thinking that in this case the mail had more bite than the messenger, when the front bell rang. Minutes later that same evening, sharp, single, insistent, I had a hunch it wasn't the evening paper. At 7:30 the next morning, I was halfway through a cup of coffee that didn't deserve the name when the city broke in. The radio, which I keep low enough to keep peace with Wolfe's orchids upstairs, crackled out a bulletin. A man named Jonas Greel, yes, our lunch-hour visitor of bad manners, had been found dead in his heron coop by the East River, motor idling, throat cut so neat a surgeon might have envied the handiwork. I was still chewing on that when the brownstone doorbell went off like Judgment Day. Fritz, of course, froze mid-polish of the silver tray, and I went to answer it, knowing in my bones who would be waiting. Inspector Kramer didn't bother with introductions or even a proper good morning. He blew into the office 5 minutes later like a north wind wearing a cigar. His hat hit my filing cabinet, his coat hit my chair, and his glare hit Wolfe. "Heard the news, Wolfe," he barked. "Your friend Greel won't be needing his publisher anymore. He's dead, and unless I'm wrong, you're mixed up in it." Wolfe, who had just descended from his orchids and hadn't yet earned his breakfast beer, did not take kindly to that tone. "I do not have friends, Inspector," he said evenly. "I have clients, and Mr. Greel was never one. Your accusation is premature and discourteous." Kramer slapped an evidence envelope on the desk. Inside, glinting faintly under the lamp, was a sheet sealed with blue wax, the unmistakable oval impression of Wolfe's own monogram. "That," Kramer said, stabbing a finger at it, "was found in the dead man's car. I don't like coincidences, Wolfe." Wolfe examined it, nostrils flaring like a judge at an unclean brief. "Coincidences exist, Inspector. So do imbecilities. To assume I conduct correspondence with corpses is one of the latter." "Don't get cute. You can explain at the DA's office if you'd rather." Wolfe's eyebrows went up, and for a second I thought we might lose the ceiling. I decided a change of subject might preserve the plaster. "How do you know it's Wolfe's seal?" I asked. "Could be a copy. Anybody can buy blue wax." "Not this kind," Kramer growled. Lab says it's a custom mix, same grade you use for your fancy stationery. And before you ask, no, we didn't dig it out of the gutter. It was on a folded note beside the stiff. What did the note say? I asked. Nothing printable, just the words, "You were warned." He eyed Wolfe. Sound familiar? Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. No, but if you continue to disturb my breakfast with innuendo, the only warning will be to your digestion. Kramer puffed smoke toward the ceiling. You can be indicted for obstruction, Wolfe. I should prefer disembowelment, less tedious. The silence that followed could have curdled milk. Then Kramer ground his cigar into the ashtray, left it smouldering like an insult, and snapped. Fine. Don't leave town, either of you. I'll be back, with a warrant if I have to. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the orchids upstairs. When the echoes died, Wolfe sat immobile, staring at the blue stick of wax on his desk like it had betrayed him. Later that morning, at 11:20, the bell announced company that sounded expensive. By the time I reached the front door, it had already rung 3 times, each with more authority than the last. I opened it and found Inspector Kramer filling the frame, coat flapping, cigar going full steam. Behind him stood Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins, holding an envelope thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. When Kramer doesn't bother with hellos, you can assume he brought trouble. Warrants, he said, brushing past me, and I don't mean rabbits. I followed him into the office where Wolfe sat at his desk, big as a verdict and twice as immovable. Wolfe looked up from his morning reading, something in Latin that probably made more sense than Kramer's expression, and said, "Good morning, Inspector. I take it civilization has collapsed again." Kramer grunted. "Not yet, but it's close. We've had the lab run tests on that seal we found in Greel's car. Guess what? It's a perfect match to your mold." "The impression, not the formulation," I said. "Wolfe, down to the scratches." Wolfe's eyebrows climbed like 2 suspicious caterpillars. "Indeed? And this revelation justifies invading my office?" "You bet it does," Kramer shot back, slapping the warrants onto the desk. "That's for your desk, your typewriter, and that fancy wax you use for your private letters. We're seizing samples. Either you cooperate or I haul you in." The silence that followed was so thick even the orchids upstairs might have wilted. Wolfe's lips compressed into a single dangerous line. Then he said, with that cold, theatrical calm of his, "Phooey, to accuse me of peddling literary forgery is a degradation of logic and a calumny against intellect. You insult the city by serving it." "Save the speech," Kramer said. "You're not on the stand." He jabbed his cigar toward the wax stick sitting beside the inkstand. "My men will take that, and we'll have your typewriter ribbon too." I stepped in before Wolfe's blood pressure reached operatic levels. "Now, Inspector," I said, "you might want to dial it back a notch. The last time you tried to search this desk without a signed court order, Wolfe threatened to sue the city for harassment. And as much as I enjoy your company, I'd hate to spend the next month testifying about municipal etiquette." "You stay out of this, Goodwin," Kramer barked. "This isn't about etiquette. A man's dead. His car had Wolfe's seal. That makes it my business." "Correction," I said. "It makes it your headache. Because if this hits the papers, and it will, those headlines are going to read something like 'Publisher Murdered, Police Chase Gourmet Detective.' That'll look mighty fine over breakfast." Kramer stopped pacing long enough to give me the kind of glare that could fry eggs. Then he sighed through his nose. "You think I like this? I've got the DA breathing down my neck and the press already calling Greel's murder a society scandal. If there's a forgery angle, I've got to check every name on that seal." "So check them," I said easily, "but maybe start with someone who didn't weigh 300 pounds and hate leaving his house." That one almost drew a grin, but he caught himself and snapped, "We're doing that too." Meanwhile, Wolfe had risen, not fast, but enough to make Stebbins take half a step back. "Inspector," he said in that low rumble that always precedes a storm, "if you so much as open a single drawer of that desk without my consent, you will regret it. I will sue you personally for trespass and the city for persecution. You may enjoy a jest, but I do not." "This isn't a jest," Kramer roared, his cigar trembling. "The lab confirmed the seal was made from your mold. That's evidence, Wolfe." "It is a coincidence, and not even an interesting one," Wolfe retorted. "I possess wax, a mold, and stationery. So do others. You cannot deduce guilt from correspondence supplies." Stebbins started forward with a clipboard, but I intercepted him. "Hold on, Pearlie. If you're taking samples, let's do this civilized. You can have an impression, not the original. Wolfe will supervise." Wolfe gave me a sharp look, but didn't contradict it. After a long, smoky pause, Kramer nodded. "Fine, but I want a full report from the lab by tonight." He motioned for Stebbins to produce a small plaster kit. Fritz, appearing silently at the doorway, looked horrified to see strange hands near Wolfe's desk. Wolfe gestured him back. "It's all right, Fritz. The office has survived worse violations, some of them literary." While Stebbins worked, Kramer prowled. "You know, Wolfe, people out there think you're mixed up in this. They figure a man like Greel blackmails the wrong crowd, and suddenly the great Nero Wolfe's name shows up in his car. Doesn't look good." Wolfe's nostrils flared. "Public opinion is not a court of law." "No," Kramer said, "but it fills newspapers." That landed. For a moment, Wolfe's expression softened, not with guilt, but disgust. "Mr. Goodwin," he said finally, "note the degradation of civic discourse. Murder reduced to a matter of press inches." "Noted," I said, "though the press inches also pay my bar tab sometimes." That earned me a side glare from both men. "All right," I added, "then let's keep this tidy. Inspector, you've done your seizure, you've got your plaster souvenir, and Wolfe's orchids are missing their morning serenity. Anything else?" Kramer stuck the cigar back in his mouth. "Yeah, don't leave town." "If he leaves the brownstone, it'll be a miracle," I said. "You're safe there." He muttered something about sarcasm and signed the receipt for the wax sample. "If this comes back as proof the seal was yours, I'll be back with a subpoena." "Splendid," Wolfe said icily. "We shall serve coffee." Kramer hesitated in the doorway, hat in hand. The fight had drained out of him a little. "You know, Wolfe," he said, "for a man who says he hates publicity, you sure attract it." Wolfe inclined his head. "It's the burden of competence, Inspector. Few men bear it graciously." That earned him a grunt of almost respect. Kramer jammed the hat back on his head. "All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report, if you ever bother to give one." Then he stomped out, trailing cigar ash across the rug like breadcrumbs of jurisdiction. The door clicked shut, and silence returned. Wolfe eased himself back into the chair, exhaled, and rang the bell cord. Fritz reappeared immediately, still looking indignant. "Beer," Wolfe said, "a large one, chilled." As Fritz retreated, Wolfe turned to me. "Your handling of the inspector was acceptable." That was as good as a handshake from anyone else. "Much obliged," I said. "I figured headlines were scarier than subpoenas." "Indeed," he murmured. "The world is ruled by its appetite for scandal. Jonas Greel understood that. It killed him." Fritz came back with the beer, setting it down gently. Wolfe poured a precise inch into the glass, savouring it as though cleansing the taste of law enforcement. "Archie," he said without looking up, "you may type a memorandum. Inspector Kramer, visit with warrants, accusations unfounded, manner deplorable." "Yes, sir," I said, reaching for the typewriter. "Shall I file it under unpleasant social calls?" "File it under idiocy," and he said. I rolled in a sheet of paper and started typing, listening to the keys chatter against the hum of rain outside. Kramer's cigar smoke still lingered, curling upward toward the ceiling like a bad conscience. Wolfe sipped his beer, eyes half closed, mind already working somewhere beyond my reach. He'd be quiet until dinner, thinking about that seal, that wax, and the way reputation sticks to murder like glue. The light from the window was grey with storm, and the rain drummed a steady dirge against the panes. "Archie," he said finally, his voice low, "someone has trespassed here. They have touched my instruments, my seal, and, by extension, my name." "Maybe Greel dropped by last night for a midnight autograph," I said. He didn't bite. His gaze stayed fixed on the wax. Someone had access. He looked toward the dining room where Fritz hovered uncertainly with the breakfast tray. "Fritz, did you lock the desk after cleaning yesterday?" Fritz's face was the colour of chalk frosting. "I did, sir, as always. The key never leaves the drawer." Wolfe nodded slowly. "Then either the key was copied, or the drawer opened by guile." I said, "Greel had a smear of that wax on his glove when I showed him out. Maybe he filched a piece then." Wolfe closed his eyes. "You told me that yesterday. I was foolish not to consider it." His hand tightened around the wax stick. and for a moment I thought he might snap it in two. So now our unwelcome guest is a corpse, and my monogram is his epitaph. Phooey. He rang for Fritz, who came forward with the breakfast tray as if entering a courtroom. "You will not read the morning paper," Wolfe ordered. "I will not have sensationalism poisoning this house." "Yes, sir," Fritz murmured, "though the neighbours, let them speculate, they always do." He took a measured bite of sausage, chewing with grim precision, then set down his fork. "Archie, our immediate task is not to solve Mr. Greel's murder. It is to protect this establishment from defilement. The police will make a circus of it otherwise." I said, "Meaning you'll investigate anyway?" His eyes opened, slow and heavy. "Meaning, Mr. Goodwin, that we must restore the sanctity of this household's name. If that requires solving the murder, then yes." "And here I thought you didn't care about reputation." "My reputation, no. My household, yes. This roof shelters my honour as surely as my person." He looked at me over the rim of his glass. "You understand?" "Sure," I said. "You want the killer caught before the newspapers learn how to spell Wolfe." That earned me the faintest curl at the corner of his mouth. "Your cynicism, Archie, remains incurable, but effective." He pushed his plate away. "You will begin by retrieving every published notice of Greel's agency. Ascertain his partners, his enemies, his debts. Pay particular attention to anyone connected with the club affair. I suspect that manuscript has fermented into something lethal." I nodded. "You'll talk to Kramer again?" "When necessary. Preferably never." He gestured to the bell cord. "And Fritz, see that the office locks are changed before noon. Whoever imitated my seal may return to complete the insult." Fritz bowed, still pale. "At once, sir." When he'd gone, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. The rain had thickened to a steady drumbeat, the kind that made the brownstone feel smaller, tighter. "Archie," he murmured, "you will take care today. Someone has already intruded once." "I'll take care," I said, "though I doubt anyone's after me. I'm not the one with monogrammed wax." "No," he said, "but you are my arm and my eyes, and an injury to you would wound me more than I can tolerate." That was as close as Wolfe ever got to affection. He might as well have sent me flowers. I grinned. "Don't worry, I'll try to stay unslain until lunch." "Do so," he said. "I dislike empty chairs." I fetched my coat and hat from the rack, pausing at the door. "You want me to bring back anything else from the outside world, besides scandal?" "Yes," he said, eyes still closed. "Beer. This day already requires fortification." I left him there, brooding under the amber light with the rain's rhythm marking time. As I shut the door behind me, I glanced once at the wax stick gleaming on his desk. When a corpse drags your boss's stationery into the headlines, breakfast loses some of its flavour, but it sure promises a long day ahead. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was back on East 48th Street, climbing the same narrow stairs that smelled like ink, carbon paper, and ambition gone sour. The gold letters on the frosted door still read Greel Literary Bureau, but the atmosphere inside had changed. The clatter of typewriters was half-hearted, the girls pale from a morning of police questions. You could feel the ghost of Jonas Greel at every desk, wagging his cigar and demanding another copy of a manuscript that would never reach print. I gave the room my most harmless grin and said, "Ladies, don't stop on my account. I just came for a few words, not a confession." That earned me one suspicious glance, one cold shoulder, and one very deliberate sigh. The suspicious glance belonged to a slim brunette with nervous fingers and carbon smudges on her cuffs, Miss Alice Ray, Greel's chief typist, according to the door label. The cold shoulder came from a blonde whose perfume could have drowned out a courtroom, Dora Leland, novelist, ambitious type. And the sigh, well, that floated from the tall, elegant woman leaning on the inner doorway like she owned the place. That was Vivian Holt, widow, philanthropist, patroness of words with money to burn. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice smooth enough to butter toast. "I assume you're here on Mr. Wolfe's behalf." I tipped my hat. "Habit, ma'am. When trouble shows up with a fountain pen, he sends me to see how much ink it's spilled." Her smile didn't move beyond the lips. "Jonas Greel spilled plenty. You'll forgive me if I don't mourn excessively." Alice Ray looked horrified. "Mrs. Holt, please." "It's Mrs. Holt, dear," Vivian corrected gently, then turned to me. "Jonas had talent but no decency. He enjoyed secrets too much, and other people's especially. I said, "So I hear. He was planning a little book called The Club Affair. Ring a bell?" Alice's fingers froze on her typewriter keys. Dora Leland gave a small, derisive laugh. Ring a bell? It was practically a dinner gong. Greel thought he could roast the city's upper crust under a literary broiler. That chapter would have made enemies enough to fill a phone directory. "Chapter 10, I said casually, watching reactions. Alice flinched. Dora raised an eyebrow. Vivian stayed still. I'd seen subtler poker faces in the DA's office. "You know what it was about?" Dora toyed with her cigarette. "Something to do with a private dining club. Men who think taste is a moral right and women a decoration. Jonas called it the Culinary Guild. Sounds civilized, doesn't it?" "As civilized as arsenic in soup," I said. Vivian Holt moved nearer, her perfume slipping into the air like a trained accomplice. "You'll find, Mr. Goodwin, that the Culinary Guild is a philanthropic society devoted to preserving culinary excellence. Jonas wanted to turn it into a scandal sheet. I advised him to reconsider." "Meaning you were bankrolling the book," I said. "Meaning," she replied coolly, "I was financing his office. The contents were supposed to remain tasteful." Instead, Dora broke in, he decided to bite the hand that fed him. Our hands. Mine too. I was writing a harmless novel about social climbers. He twisted it into evidence for his precious exposé. She stubbed out the cigarette viciously. He deserved to be ruined, but not murdered. That word fell like a knife. The room went quiet except for the faint clack of a typewriter from the outer office. I let the silence breathe a few seconds before saying, "So, none of you liked him, all of you had reason to hate him, and one of you's still here typing invoices. That's quite the staff meeting." Alice Ray stood up, her voice trembling. "You can't think. Mr. Greel may have been difficult, but I was loyal. I typed every chapter myself. He trusted me." "Did he trust you enough to leave the key to his office?" I asked. "Because someone's been playing with blue wax and seals that look a little too familiar." She shook her head violently. "I locked up last night at 7. He said he was meeting Mrs. Holt for dinner." "Alice," Vivian snapped. "That's enough." It wasn't, of course. I looked at the widow, who didn't blink. "Dinner where?" I asked. "At the Culinary Guild," she said, tone even. "He wanted to meet a man there. Henry Vale, the guild's chairman. I refused to go. Mr. Greel was fond of creating scenes, and I don't attend public quarrels." That tidbit sparkled like a gemstone in a coal pile. "You didn't go," I repeated, "but he went alone." "Presumably." She straightened her gloves. "You'd do well to keep Mr. Wolfe out of this, Mr. Goodwin. He's a connoisseur of cuisine. The guild is a delicate institution. It won't thank him for intruding into its kitchen." Her eyes met mine, calm, polished, dangerous. I smiled anyway. "We don't intrude, Mrs. Holt. We just show up when the menu includes murder." That earned me a faint laugh from Dora Leland. "You two should do radio, the Fat Man and the Wit." "We've been offered a slot," I said. "Sundays, right between the crime shows." Alice, near tears now, grabbed a folder from her desk. "If you're accusing us, you're wasting time. Look, these are the last dictations I took." He was rewriting the guild chapter, trying to tone it down. He said Mrs. Holt was right, that he'd serve them cold instead of raw. That's all I know. I glanced at the papers, half-typed pages, margins full of penciled edits. One line jumped out. "A gentleman may dine on lies as long as they're seasoned with discretion." I pocketed the wording mentally. It had Wolfe written all over it, philosophically speaking. "Mind if I borrow that phrase?" I said. Alice blinked. "It's not evidence, is it?" "Not yet," I said, "but it might make good copy." Vivian gathered her purse. "I believe this meeting is over. Miss Ray, lock the door when you leave. Mr. Goodwin, tell your employer to choose his acquaintances more carefully." "We try," I said, "but they keep dying on us." Outside, the rain had turned to mist, wrapping the street in grey gauze. I lit a cigarette and headed for the corner phone booth. When Wolfe answered, his voice was drier than sandpaper. "Report, Archie." 3 women and 1 dead man," I said. "Miss Ray, the loyal typist, Dora Leland, the bitter novelist, and Vivian Holt, the sponsor with a conscience plated in gold. They all knew about a chapter in Greel's exposé called The Club Affair, centered on something called the Culinary Guild. Greel was trying to blackmail the dinner crowd." I could almost hear Wolfe's brow lift. "The Culinary Guild," he mused. An association of gourmets devoted to pretense. I've had the misfortune to dine with them once. They are Philistines with silver forks." "Then maybe one of the hem decided to trade a fork for a knife," I said. "Also, Mrs. Holt advised me to keep you out of it." "Indeed? That confirms my necessity." He paused. "You will not return there today." "Why not?" "Because," he said, "you are easily distracted by women, and I require your mind unclouded." "That's unfair," I told him. "They were mostly over 30. "Phooey," he said, which was Wolfian for don't argue. "Return at once. We shall dine at 8, and before that I must think." "Want me to bring dessert gossip?" "No, bring facts. And Archie, be discreet." I hung up, smiling. Discretion in my business is what you practice until someone pulls a gun. I stepped into the drizzle and flagged a cab back to West 35th. By the time I reached the brownstone, Fritz had laid out the beer glasses, and the smell of veal and tarragon drifted from the kitchen. Wolfe was already at his desk, eyes closed, hands folded like an overstuffed Buddha meditating on sin. "Well?" he asked without opening them. I gave him the highlights. When I got to Mrs. Holt's warning, his eyelids twitched. "An empty threat," he said. "No kitchen is private when murder is on the menu. You did adequately." "Adequately?" I said. "That's practically a medal from you." He opened one eye. "Do not preen. Gallivanting among women is hardly an intellectual achievement." "Maybe not," I said, "but it's good field work." He grunted. "Bah! Go type your notes. Include every adjective they used. Vocabulary betrays motive more often than behavior." He reached for his beer, signaling dismissal. 3 women, Archie, and 1 dead man. Somewhere in that ratio lies the truth. I went to my typewriter, wondering which woman had seasoned Greel's last meal with murder. When I finished typing, I read the memo aloud. "Inspector Kramer, visit with warrants, accusations unfounded, manner deplorable." Wolfe nodded. "Add 1 more line," he said softly. "The police are chasing shadows, and the shadow will lead them back to our door." "That's comforting," I said. "You want me to oil the hinges?" "No," he said. "Let them creak. I like to hear incompetence approaching." He raised the beer glass in a slow, ceremonial salute. "To the futility of officialdom." "And to the press," I added. "May they spell your name right." His lips twitched. "Enough, Archie." That was dismissal. I leaned back, grinning. Kramer had left smoke, Wolfe had left indignation, and I had another line for my notebook. "When the cops start collecting your wax, the case is beginning to heat." At 9 that night I was standing in the lobby of the Hotel Britanno, wondering whether the marble floor or the doorman's expression had been waxed more recently. The Britanno was one of those uptown establishments that like to pretend prohibition never ended. Every man a gentleman, every scandal discreet, and every waiter trained to see nothing, which made it the perfect spot for the Culinary Guild's so-called private dinner, the one Vivian Holt had cancelled an hour before the first cork should have popped. And since cancelled dinners have a way of turning into clues, I decided to drop in before the silverware cooled. A crisp $10 bill persuaded a tired waiter to lend me his passkey and a word of warning. "The room's been locked since 5, he said. "Miss Holt called from her car, said the guests wouldn't be coming." He shrugged. "You'll find it just like it was set." He wasn't wrong. When I stepped into the banquet suite, the lights were low, the air faintly perfumed with hothouse lilies and disappointment. A long mahogany table gleamed under a chandelier that would have made King Arthur feel underdressed. 12 places had been set with surgical precision, each plate framed by 3 forks and 2 glasses waiting for company that never came. And there, at the head of the table, stood the lone card, Mr. Jonas Greel. The ink curled elegantly across the paper, as if daring me to pull out the chair. I didn't. I've seen ghosts better company than Greel. Still, I circled the table slowly, hands in pockets, letting the silence talk. It was the kind of silence that had weight, the sort that follows a conversation you weren't invited to. The napkins were folded into little pyramids, the silver untouched, the wine already decanted and stoppered, breathing politely in silence. Whatever was supposed to happen here had been planned with care and cancelled with panic. I lit a cigarette and leaned on the nearest chair, surveying the battlefield. 12 empty chairs, I muttered, and 1 ghost with perfect table manners. The joke didn't echo. Then, as I moved past the centrepiece, A floral arrangement big enough to hide a debutante. I noticed a glint under the tablecloth. Curiosity may have killed more detectives than bullets, but it's in the job description. I lifted the cloth and found the little intruder, a microphone wired neatly through the floor and into a wall socket that led to an adjoining anteroom. It wasn't hotel equipment. Whoever set it there had expected to record the night's conversation, not feed the orchestra. I crouched, tracing the cable with my lighter's glow until it disappeared behind a panel. A loose screw let me pry it open. Inside, a portable transmitter no bigger than a cigar box waited, switched off but primed. The make was foreign, expensive, and definitely not legal for dinner entertainment. I'd seen similar setups in cases where blackmail got dressed up as journalism. And since Greel's last known profession was turning gossip into income, the picture was starting to look familiar. I was still studying the gadget when footsteps clicked outside the door. I flicked off the lighter and straightened up fast, cigarette halfway to my lips. The knob turned, the door eased open, and in came the same waiter holding a flashlight and wearing guilt-like cologne. "You still here, mister?" he whispered. "The night manager's making rounds." "Relax," I told him. "I'm admiring the decor. Ever seen this room used for anything besides food fights?" He shook his head. "The guild rents it regular. Fancy people. They don't like reporters or cameras." He frowned, eyes darting to the table. "Funny, though. Last week a man came in asking about the wiring. Said he was from the maintenance department. We don't have any new maintenance men." "Describe him." "Tall, grey hair, maybe 50, foreign accent, real polite." That fit nobody I knew, which didn't help my nerves. I peeled another bill from my wallet and handed it over. "You didn't see me," I said. "And if anyone asks, tell them the wiring passed inspection." He pocketed the money, nodded, and disappeared like a waiter in a ghost story. The quiet crept back in. I took one last look around the table, the chairs waiting like witnesses, then slipped the microphone free and dropped it into my coat pocket. Wolfe would want to examine it himself, if only to lecture me on the vulgarity of modern espionage. I switched off the chandelier, letting the room sink into shadow, and left by the service door. Back at the brownstone, the air smelled of polish and Fritz's late-night bread rising in the kitchen. Wolfe was still awake, never a good sign. The office glowed with lamplight, and he sat behind the desk with his hands folded over the yellow silk of his dressing gown. The look he gave me could have chilled beer without a refrigerator. "You are late," he said. 10 minutes past 11. "Blame traffic," I said, dropping the microphone onto his blotter. "Or the ghost of Jonas Greel. I've been dining with both." He eyed the device without touching it. "Explain." I did, giving him the short version. Empty banquet room, untouched dinner, Greel's name card, and the listening device set to catch voices that never came. When I finished, he leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. "Vivian Holt cancelled the dinner," he murmured, "and yet the table was laid, the wine decanted, and the electronics arranged. A performance prepared, then abandoned." "More like a blackmail act that never opened," I said. "If Greel planned to record the guild's chatter, maybe he picked the wrong night to sharpen his quill." "Possibly," Wolfe said. "Or possibly someone else planned to record him." He gestured toward the microphone. "Examine that tomorrow, but carefully. Do not tamper tonight." I wasn't planning to broadcast dance music through it. "You were planning," he said dryly, "to act without reflection, which is equally perilous. Did you encounter Mrs. Holt?" "No," I said. "Just a nervous waiter with a good memory for tips. Says someone checked the wiring last week. Older man, grey hair, foreign accent. Maybe the guild's electrician." "Or perhaps," Wolfe said, "a ghost of competence." He rose, always a slow, deliberate event, and crossed to the globe to pour himself beer. "Archie, it is too late for gallivanting. You will retire." That was uncharacteristic. Wolfe never cared whether I slept or solved crimes standing on my head, as long as I brought results. "Something wrong?" I asked. He handed me a small glare over the rim of his glass. "You have a tendency to underestimate danger when it is dressed in sophistication. The Culinary Guild is not composed of cutthroats, but of men who conceal knives behind courtesy. I would prefer not to retrieve your corpse from a hotel pantry." That one landed between insult and affection. "Thanks, I said. "I'll remember that the next time someone invites me to dinner." He sipped, considered, and waved me toward the door. "Go to bed, Archie. We shall pursue this in the morning. The orchids have endured enough disturbance for one day, and so have I." Sure, I said, pausing in the doorway. But for the record, if someone was going to blackmail the Culinary Guild, they sure knew their menu. Nothing dirties silver faster than scandal. Go, he said again, softer, and lock the door behind you. I dislike surprises. I left him there, the office heavy with the smell of beer and suspicion, and climbed the stairs to my room. Outside, a light rain had started tapping the window pane, a polite applause for the dinner that didn't happen and the crime that almost certainly had. The next morning, just after 8, rain in Manhattan has a way of making even the honest buildings look guilty. By 9:30 the next morning, I reached the Greele Literary Bureau. The gutters were overflowing, the typists' umbrellas had staged a mutiny by the door, and the whole block smelled like wet paper and cheap ink. I pushed through the front door, shaking off the weather and whatever optimism I'd brought with me, and the first sound I heard was someone crying, soft, muffled, and coming from the inner office. It wasn't the kind of crying you ignore. Alice Ray was sitting at her desk, eyes red, shoulders shaking, her hands resting on what looked like the remains of a Remington typewriter. One of the keys, the R, was bent backward like a broken finger. The ribbon hung loose, dangling to the floor. She didn't notice me until I said, "If that's your idea of a letter of resignation, Miss Ray, it's got style but poor legibility." She jumped, wiping her face with a handkerchief that had already lost the fight. "Oh, Mr. Goodwin, someone broke in last night." She gestured helplessly at the desk. The drawers were open, my notes scattered, and the typewriter. Look at it. He loved this one. Said it had character. "Yeah," I said, squatting down to inspect the damage. "Now it's got motive." The rain tapped against the window like a metronome. Papers were strewn across the carpet, half soaked where a draft had blown in. It looked like someone had rummaged in a hurry, not for cash, but for words. A ribbon spool lay near the wastebasket, and next to it a sheet of carbon paper had been stepped on, smudged and half torn. I peeled it off the floor. "You didn't touch anything else?" I asked. She shook her head. "I came in at 8. The lock wasn't forced. I thought maybe I'd left it open." "You didn't," I said. "And whoever came in didn't bother with the safe or the filing cabinet, just the typewriter. That's a choice, not a burglary." I held the carbon sheet up to the light, careful not to smear it further. The faint imprint of a line shimmered across the top. The chef refused him service. That stopped me cold. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the echo. I'd heard them before, not on paper but in Fritz Brenner's offended voice 2 days ago. Mr. Wolfe does not dine with boors. A chef refusing service. A man insulted at a kitchen door. Jonas Greele. I folded the scrap neatly and slid it into my inside pocket. "Miss Ray," I said, "when's the last time anyone else had access to this office?" "No one. Mr. Greele always locked it when he left. Only Mrs. Holt had a duplicate key." "And you?" Yes, I have one, but it's with me. Always." She dug into her purse and produced a brass key as proof. "It doesn't make sense. Why destroy a typewriter?" "To silence it," I said, "or to make sure it couldn't say anything else." She looked at me blankly. "Do you think it's connected to his death?" "I think in this town everything's connected to death if you follow the paper trail long enough." I gave her my most disarming grin. "You've been helpful, Miss Ray. Now do me a favour. Lock the door behind me and go get some coffee. Black, strong, and quiet." When she'd gone, I made a quick circuit of the office. The drawers were indeed open, but not rifled through completely. Whoever had searched here had known exactly what they wanted. One sheet of paper, one paragraph, maybe even that single line. The rest of the manuscript boxes were untouched. On the windowsill sat a wilted rose in a coffee mug marked Greele Bureau, words that matter. Irony, apparently, still had a sense of humour. I picked up the phone on her desk, dialed the brownstone, and waited through 2 rings before Fritz's calm Swiss accent answered. "Brownstone residence." "Archie Goodwin, I need Wolfe." "He is in the plant rooms," Fritz said, "but I will call him." A pause, then Wolfe's voice, smooth as ever. "Yes, Archie?" "We've got vandalism at the Bureau," I said. "Someone broke a typewriter, specifically the R key. Either they hate consonants or they were making a point." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "A typewriter is not a weapon." "Maybe not, but they used it as one. I found a carbon scrap. The line says the chef refused him service. Ring any bells?" There was a silence long enough for me to hear the faint hiss of the orchid's misting system in the background. Then Wolfe said, very quietly, "Repeat that." I did. He exhaled slowly. "Archie, you will come home at once." "You mean now?" "Yes, immediately." I couldn't resist. "You're not usually this eager for my company before lunch." "Do not trifle," he said, the edge sharp enough to cut glass. "Someone is reaching into this house through pretext and metaphor. I will not have it." That was Wolfe at his most dangerous, when emotion snuck through the diction. I hung up, looked around once more, and turned toward the door. Then something glinted under the corner of the desk. I crouched and found a small brass object wedged between the leg and the floor moulding, half of a cufflink, its oval face engraved with a fork crossed over a knife on a tiny shield. It wasn't Alice's. It looked expensive, the kind that clings to men's dinner jackets. I pocketed it too, one clue for the brain, one for the tailor. Outside, the rain had thickened to a steady sheet. I stepped to the curb and hailed a cab, my mind running faster than the meter. A broken R, a line about a chef, a murdered publisher who'd dined with enemies. If you put those ingredients together, you didn't get a recipe. You got a confession written in shorthand. By the time I reached West 35th Street, the sky had turned the colour of burnt paper. Inside, the brownstone was warm and silent except for the faint hum of the elevator. Wolfe was waiting in the office, already seated behind the desk, his bulk framed by the yellow glow of the lamp. His expression was unreadable, but his hands were steepled in front of him, his version of a loaded gun. "You have the fragment?" he asked. I handed him the carbon scrap. He studied it without touching the ink. "The chef refused him service," he murmured. "Archie, do you perceive the significance?" "I perceive I'm going to need another cup of coffee before you explain." He ignored that. "This phrase, it is too specific to be coincidence. Mr. Greel insulted Fritz years ago. Fritz, in defending the dignity of his craft, refused him a meal. Now Greel is dead, and his final dictation invokes that refusal. The symmetry is appalling." I frowned. "You think somebody's framing Fritz?" "I think," he said gravely, "that someone wishes to poison the perception of our house. First my seal, now my cook. There is malice at work, deliberate and cultured." He set the scrap down, eyes narrowing. "We will proceed methodically. You will write a memorandum of this morning's events. At 2 o'clock I will see Mr. Panzer." "Saul?" I said. "So it's serious." "It is intolerable," he corrected. "Now leave me." As I turned to go, Fritz appeared at the doorway, immaculate as always, but pale. "Lunch is ready," he said softly. Wolfe nodded. "Not yet. Bring beer." I caught Fritz's eye as I passed. He didn't ask what I'd found. He didn't have to. Sometimes silence tells you who's afraid. At 8:15, that evening, thunder rolled over the brownstone like an uninvited guest who intended to stay for dinner. Fritz stood by the dining table, hands clasped tight enough to leave crescent marks in his palms, his face the colour of bread dough left too long to rise. Fritz Brenner was the most even-tempered man I knew, a chef who could face a soufflé collapse with more grace than most people face death. But that morning he looked ready to season himself and roast on principle. Wolfe sat at the head of the table, still in his maroon dressing gown, a folded napkin on his knee like an emblem of command. Fritz spoke first, his accent thickened by strain. "Mr. Wolfe, I cannot keep this. It makes a sickness in me. I must tell you the truth." Wolfe looked up from his eggs, which had gone untouched. "Truth, Fritz," he said evenly, "is often an indigestible dish. Proceed." "I saw him," Fritz said. "Mr. Greel, the night before the morning bulletin, just past 10. That landed like a cleaver on marble. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Mine probably did too. "Where?" Wolfe asked. "At the side door of the Hotel Britano. He waited there when I left the kitchen. I had been consulting, only a small event, no more than advice for a source. When I came out, he was waiting in the rain." Fritz's voice shook. "He said I owed him a favour from the old days, from before this house." I leaned forward. "What kind of favour?" Fritz met my gaze briefly, then looked down. "During the war, there was a time. There were people who needed food when it was forbidden. I helped quietly. Mr. Greel knew of it. He said I must repay him now, with information." Information? Wolfe asked. Yes, about you. His eyes darted to Wolfe, full of anguish. He wanted private matters, who your clients are, what secrets you hold. He said someone would pay dearly for such things. I refused. He grew angry. I told him he would get nothing from me, and I left. That is all. The thunder answered for a while. Wolfe didn't move. The flicker of the dining room chandelier made shadows crawl over his face. And the police? He said finally. Fritz swallowed hard. They came this morning, Inspector Kramer himself. He said witnesses saw a man leaving the hotel kitchen at 10 that night. They described me. I whistled low. That's not ideal. I told them nothing, Fritz said quickly. But I am finished. They will say I quarrelled with him, that I... He stopped, breath catching. Wolfe's chair creaked as he stood, which for him was equivalent to shouting. You will not finish yourself, Fritz. His voice filled the room, steady as a verdict. You are a man of honour. You will not be destroyed by gossip or by fools who mistake integrity for guilt. Fritz looked ready to cry again. But the truth, sir. The truth, Wolfe interrupted, is that you left the man alive. That is sufficient. If the police doubt it, let them prove otherwise. You will remain in this house. You will not speak to Inspector Kramer again without my permission. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will inform no one of this conversation, not even Kramer. That raised my eyebrows. You're asking me to sit on a confession, if that's what it is. He glared. It is not a confession. It is a confidence. There is a difference, and you will honour it. I will not have our household dragged into spectacle because of a man's decency. Okay, I said, but if Kramer finds out we're holding back, he'll make the next warrant shaped like a battering ram. Pfui, Wolfe said. Kramer has a soul, if not a palate. He will wait. Fritz made a helpless sound. Mr. Wolfe, there is more. I saw someone else with him that night. That tightened the air. Describe, Wolfe commanded. A man in a dark overcoat standing by a car. He wore cufflinks, gold with a crest. A crest? I asked. Yes, a fork crossed with a knife upon a shield. I know that emblem. It is the insignia of the Culinary Guild. That brought us full circle. Wolfe's lips pressed together, and for a second I thought he might actually sit down again, but instead he walked to the window and looked out at the rain. His silhouette against the storm looked like the world had finally served him something he couldn't stomach. The Guild, he said softly, those vainglorious charlatans. Looks like one of them was dining late, I offered. He ignored me. Archie, the man with the cufflinks, find him, quietly. Do not inform Kramer until I have determined which of those gastronomic peacocks fancied himself a murderer. Fritz spoke up, trembling. Sir, you must not endanger yourself. Enough, Wolfe said, turning back. My safety rests in my intellect. Yours rests in my protection. You will stay here, you will cook my dinner, and you will not speak to outsiders. That last command hit Fritz like a reprieve. He nodded, trying for composure. Wolfe gestured toward the sideboard. You will also eat. Archie, see that he does. The man looks as if he's preparing to saute himself in despair. That got half a smile out of Fritz, which was better than nothing. He moved toward the kitchen, slow but obedient. When he was gone, Wolfe exhaled and lowered himself heavily back into his chair. The storm rattled the windows again, and he reached for the beer Fritz had set beside his plate earlier, untouched until now. He poured 2 fingers into the glass, then spoke without looking at me. Archie, loyalty is the most precious condiment of human character. Once lost, all taste departs. Sure, I said, but it also gives you heartburn when the cops get curious. He almost smiled. You are an irreverent dolt, but you are right. Kramer will return soon enough. When he does, we shall feed him truth, just enough to satisfy, not enough to choke. I nodded, lighting a cigarette. And what about our friend with the Guild cufflinks? That, Wolfe said, raising his glass, is the next course. He drank, slow and grim, while the thunder applauded. Somewhere beyond the rain, a murderer was stirring his alibi, and in the brownstone, loyalty was the one dish Wolfe would never let burn. At 10:15 sharp, I walked into the Manhattan Gourmet Club, the Guild's uptown venue of choice, the kind of place where the menu had footnotes and the maitre d' wore a moral superiority you couldn't hang up with your hat. I gave my name, flashed a smile that said I wasn't there to bus tables, and asked for Henry Vale. The maitre d' froze halfway through a nod, which told me I had the right man. They ushered me into a private lounge heavy with cigar smoke and heavier conversation. Vale stood by the fireplace, silver hair perfectly parted, the sort of man who buttered both sides of his bread, and someone else's too. He turned, smiling like an oil painting that had just been varnished. "Mr. Goodwin, isn't it? Nero Wolfe's assistant." I admitted it. "The very one. You've been busy, and not just with soufflés." He chuckled, though his eyes didn't. "I suppose this is about that unfortunate fellow Greel. Terrible business. I didn't know him personally, though he tried to, engage my interest. Writers are such needy people." "Needy how?" I asked, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than my suit. "Letters," Vale said, waving his cigar. "Demands. He hinted at publishing a chapter about certain guild dinners, implying scandal. I paid no attention. I have no skeletons in my pantry." "Just one missing cufflink," I said, pointing casually. His hand jerked before he laughed it off. "Ah, the perils of dry cleaning. I must have misplaced it." "Sure," I said. And Greel must have misplaced the grease spot on his coat, right where a cufflink would have brushed him. For a moment the mask slipped. Vale's jaw tightened. "Mr. Goodwin, insinuation is a coarse condiment. You'll forgive me if I prefer refinement." "Sure," I said, "but I find coarse condiments make people honest." He set down his cigar, the smile snapping back into place. "I'll tell you something, off the record. Greel tried to blackmail members of the guild, threatened to publish a list of adulterers and embezzlers. He even hinted at me, absurdly. Perhaps he found someone less patient. That's all I know." "That's plenty," I said, rising, "and I'll be sure to season it lightly when I tell Wolfe." Vale inclined his head. "Do, and give him my compliments on his palate." I left the club and crossed the street to where Saul Panzer sat in his battered Plymouth, hat low, eyes sharper than a cash register's. I leaned in the window. He's lying. He knew Greel. One cufflink missing, and it's a match for the guild design. Stick with him. Saul nodded once. "You got it." I headed back toward Midtown for a sandwich and a typewriter, figuring I'd beat Wolfe to the punch with a memo. But around 7, just as I was finishing my notes, the phone rang. Saul's voice came over, soft but steady. "Archie, he's moving. Vale just left the club, took a cab uptown. Looks like he's heading east." "Follow him," I said. "Already am." By the time I caught up in another cab, rain had started again, drumming the city like impatient fingers. Saul's Plymouth idled half a block from a row of brownstones that spelled money in limestone. He pointed with his chin. "Vale's inside. That's Vivian Holt's address." That name carried weight. "Our literary widow again," I said. "Seems she's setting a fuller table than she admits." Saul nodded. He went in through the side gate, lights on upstairs. No sign of anyone else. I leaned back, watching the faint glow behind lace curtains. "All right, keep eyes on the door. If Vale comes out lighter, say, without his other cufflink, I want to know before he hails a cab." Saul's grin was brief. "Got it." I left him there and headed for home. Wolfe would be waiting with orchids, beer, and judgment. When I told him about the cufflink, his brows rose half an inch, which for Wolfe was an ovation. "Excellent, Archie," he said. "You have finally observed, not merely seen." "Thanks," I said. "Next thing you'll be saying I can think." "Do not press your luck," he murmured. By dawn the next day, things were worse, and for once it wasn't because of Wolfe's orchids or Kramer's blood pressure. It was the smell that did it, that sharp metallic tang that seeps through open windows before the police cordon off a scene. I'd smelled it before, usually above a chalk outline and a pair of lifeless shoes. The Greel bureau was open but hollow. A uniform at the door let me in after I flashed credentials that said private detective, not ghoul. Inside, the typewriters sat lined like soldiers after retreat, and at the far end, Alice Ray slumped forward over hers, her fingers curled mid-keystroke. The office was thick with gas and silence. Kramer was there already, pacing like a bull penned too long. His cigar hung unlit between his teeth. "Well, Goodwin," he said. "Guess whose name came up again?" "I'll take a wild swing," I told him, keeping my eyes on the girl. "He's large, round, and allergic to exertion." Kramer grunted. We found an envelope under her elbow. Same blue wax seal as Greel's car. Wolfe's mark again. You tell me, how many murder victims can one man's stationery supply? Depends on the circulation, I said. Wolfe never liked publicity, but this is overkill. He didn't laugh. Save the jokes. We'll need Wolfe's typewriter samples again, and this time, no fancy speeches. I crouched near the desk. The typewriter's ribbon was new, but the carbon sheet beneath her last page was torn. The paper on top read, "To whom it may concern," and then nothing. On the floor, half hidden under her chair, was a photostat copy of the first blue envelope, the same one that started this merry-go-round. I picked it up with a handkerchief. You ever notice, Inspector, I said, that even murderers in this town can't leave our stationery alone? He shot me a look that could have ignited the gas. You telling me this is a frame job? I'm telling you this is bad forgery. Wolfe's wax doesn't melt at that temperature. You see the residue around the seal? Too glossy. Wrong batch. Somebody's working with copies. Kramer frowned. He hated when logic edged in. Then you tell your boss he's still on my list until I get better names. He turned, barking at Stebbins, and the room filled again with the scrape of evidence boxes and flashbulbs. When they cleared out, I took one last look at Alice. Her face was peaceful, like she'd fallen asleep over bad copy. I'd seen men die with less dignity. I left quietly and called home from the corner drugstore. Wolfe answered himself, which meant the morning was already unorthodox. Yes, Archie? She's dead, I said. Alice Ray, gas leak. Staged as suicide. The cops found another envelope, yours again. There was a pause long enough to hear him draw breath through his nose. Another counterfeit, he said flatly. That's my guess. The wax was wrong, too perfect. And there was a photostat of the first envelope. Someone's planting evidence with your signature seal. Phooey, Wolfe said. A man who kills twice with the same device is either arrogant or desperate. I prefer arrogance. It narrows the species. Kramer's still convinced you're either guilty or manufacturing an anthology of murder, I said. He'll be back with his cigar in a squad car soon. I am not concerned with Mr. Kramer's propensities. You will return immediately. Right after I dodged the press, I said. There's already a Gazette truck outside. Then use the rear exit. And Archie. His tone softened, just a notch. Be cautious. Whoever does this has read me closely. That makes him dangerous. Sure, I said, but not half as dangerous as you before breakfast. When I got back to the brownstone, the office was dim except for the desk lamp and the faint shimmer of Wolfe's beer glass. He was seated, motionless, staring at the blue stick of wax that had caused all the trouble. Photostat? He asked without looking up. Here, I said, handing him the copy in an envelope. Same layout, same phrase, but you'll love this. The signature spacing is a millimetre off. Someone traced it, but they didn't count for paper shrinkage. Wolfe examined it through the magnifier, his mouth tightening. Crudely done, yet effective enough to mislead a man of average discernment. The perpetrator is no amateur. Good, I said. That means he's smart enough to make a mistake. He raised a brow. An interesting optimism. You have something specific in mind? Yeah. Whoever's framing you isn't just using your seal. He's staging your habits, the timing, the precision, maybe even your disdain for disorder. If I were trying to fake your fingerprints on a crime, I'd make the room too neat. Wolfe nodded slowly. A compelling hypothesis, and dangerously perceptive of you. That's me. Danger on two legs, he sighed. Archie, I detest emotional melodrama, but I must confess to irritation of an unaccustomed kind. To be framed by a mind that mimics my methods is intolerable. I leaned against the desk. We'll catch him. Maybe he's part of that culinary guild crowd. They've got secrets stacked higher than Fritz's soufflé pans. Possibly, Wolfe murmured. But until proof arrives, we do not speak of Fritz to anyone, least of all Inspector Kramer. The man's sense of nuance would not survive the strain. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan like a long, bitter laugh. Wolfe poured the rest of his beer and set the glass down carefully. We will dine as usual, he said. Fritz will prepare something restorative, and afterward I shall think. Sounds thrilling, I said. Mind if I type while you philosophize? By all means, Wolfe replied. Just refrain from killing anyone at the typewriter. By late morning at 11:40, you can't even taste the coffee when the cops come crashing through, Too early for human decency, and at least an hour before Wolfe would have granted the world the favour of his presence downstairs. Fritz was fussing in the kitchen with a patience that could teach saints a thing or two about restraint. I was halfway through the Gazette crossword when the knock turned into a thud. 3 thuds, official and humorless. I opened the door and found Inspector Kramer framed there like an overgrown thundercloud with a badge. Stebbins was flanking him, chewing on a cigar stub. Behind them, 2 uniforms waited with the sort of posture that promised paperwork. "Goodwin," Kramer said. "Get Wolfe." "You could at least say good morning. The sun's up, the press is scandalizing the city, and—" "Now," I shrugged. "Sure, if you enjoy talking to a man before breakfast, I'll fetch him, but you'll regret the timing." Wolfe descended precisely 2 minutes later, still in his house jacket, expression frostier than an icebox. "Inspector Kramer," he intoned, "your punctuality is offensive. State your purpose before I consider charging rent." Kramer grunted and held up a small evidence envelope. Inside was something that glittered dully, half of a silver cufflink bearing the guild insignia. "We found its twin in the victim's coat pocket. This one was discovered in your wastebasket." That did it. Wolfe's nostrils flared like a volcano rehearsing. "Phooey! Are you suggesting that Mr. Brenner or I decorate our refuse with incriminating trinkets for your amusement?" Stebbins shoved his hat back. "We ain't suggesting, Wolfe. We're acting. The lab verified it came from the same pair. Your man Fritz had motive, opportunity, and now this." Wolfe's gaze hardened. "You dare accuse Mr. Brenner, a chef of discernment, a man of impeccable rectitude, of what? Murder by cuisine. This is grotesque." Kramer's jaw flexed. "I don't care if he's a scoffier reincarnated. The DA signed the warrant. Fritz Brenner, you're under arrest." I took 1 step forward, but Wolfe's hand rose like a wall. Fritz had appeared at the doorway, white as the linen he ironed, wiping his hands on a towel that trembled. "Inspector," he said quietly, "I swear upon all my training and my craft, I did not kill that man." Kramer didn't blink. "Tell it downtown." He nodded to the uniforms. The sight of them moving toward Fritz hit me square. "Hold it, Kramer. You haul him out like that, and you'll ruin the only civilized meals in this city." "Then learn to cook," he shot back. Fritz straightened his shoulders, dignity clinging to him like starch. "It is all right, Archie. Mr. Wolfe, please do not make trouble." Wolfe's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Trouble, Mr. Brenner, has already made itself." He turned to Kramer. "Inspector, I warn you, this outrage will not stand unredressed. You invade my home, violate decency, and abduct my staff on the strength of detritus. Were I a lesser man, I would expel you bodily." Kramer jammed the cufflink envelope into his coat. "You'll have your chance to pontificate in court." He motioned, and the uniforms guided Fritz out. The door closed behind them with a thud that echoed clear to the orchid rooms. Silence settled, heavy, airless. Wolfe didn't move. Neither did I. It wasn't often I saw the great Nero Wolfe look small, but standing in that wide office under the weight of absence, he seemed carved from marble that had cracked inside. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Finally, he turned away and reached for the bell cord. I expected a command, a tirade, but none came. He pulled it once, then again. Fritz, of course, would not answer. "Confound them," he muttered, "to besmirch my household with their brutish suspicions." His voice trailed off. I poured 2 fingers of beer from the refrigerator, set it beside him. "You'll want that, boss." He stared at it. "At this hour?" "At any hour that calls itself blackmail with handcuffs." For a moment I thought he'd actually drink. Instead, he placed the glass on the desk without touching it. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "You will retrieve the newspaper accounts of this farce. Summon Saul Panzer. We must proceed methodically." That was Wolfe's way of saying the world had slipped its moorings, and he intended to haul it back by logic alone. I nodded. "Saul will be here inside the hour." He was already sniffing around Vale and Vivian Holt. "Good. They are wolves masquerading as patrons." He exhaled, slow and pained. "Mr. Brenner is loyal to a fault. To see his integrity impugned—" "Makes you mad enough to skip lunch," I finished. He shot me a look that was half irritation, half gratitude. "Do not jest." "I'm not. I'm making a vow. We'll get him out, and whoever planted that cufflink will wish they'd chosen a garbage can on another block. Wolfe's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile since sunrise. Your enthusiasm, though barbaric, is appreciated. I sat down across from him. Kramer's too smart to fall for planted evidence forever. Once the lab men cool their ashtrays, they'll see it doesn't add up. Perhaps, but justice is sluggish when fed on bureaucracy. He leaned back, closing his eyes. For now, I will ascend to the orchids. That's your version of pacing the floor. He ignored me, rising with deliberate heaviness. You will inform no one of my distress, Archie, not even Mr. Cohen. The matter remains ours. Yes, sir. As he moved toward the elevator, the untouched beer gleamed amber in the light, a lonely sentinel beside his empty chair. I collected the glass and took it to the sink, feeling the fizz die under my thumb. When I turned back, the office looked different, larger, quieter, like a stage after the actors had been dragged off before the final line. They'd hauled Fritz out like he'd burned the roast of the century, and Wolfe, my boss, my friend, was left to stew in silence, not the kind that cools, the kind that waits, slow and patient, until it's ready to boil. And somewhere in that mess of warrants, cufflinks, and blue wax, someone had just written themselves a death warrant, signed in the wrong man's kitchen. By 10:30 that night, the brownstone was quiet enough to hear Fritz's clock ticking all the way from the kitchen, which meant either Wolfe was in full brain combustion mode or asleep, sitting upright in his chair. I was betting on the former. I'd just finished typing up the day's disaster log when Saul Panzer arrived with a manila envelope under his arm, and that look he gets when he's carrying something hotter than coffee on a July stoop. He didn't bother with small talk. Found it, he said. Hidden carbon, back of the bottom file drawer. The original Chapter 10. He laid it on my desk like a live grenade. Wolfe, in his chair under the lamplight, looked up from the crossword he wasn't pretending to do. Show me. I slit the envelope. Inside was a single carbon copy, onion skin paper, faint purple typing neat as piano keys. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Excellent, he murmured. Greel's hand. Observe the margin alignment, slightly off left, characteristic of the Smith Corona used in his office. He took the sheet delicately between thumb and forefinger, like it might stain his sense of order. I leaned over his shoulder and read aloud the first line. Chapter 10, The Club Affair. The words that followed could have gotten a man shot, maybe already had. It spelled out the Culinary Guild's private dinners, not as affairs of gastronomy, but of graft. City contracts traded for truffles, chefs bribed to bury scandal under bechamel. Henry Vale's name appeared 3 times, followed by a flourish that belonged to Vivian Holt, silent financier. I let out a low whistle, leave it to a dead publisher to deliver a better plot twist than life. Wolfe's eyelids flickered, which was his version of applause. Mr. Greel was an odious man, but an industrious one. This document, if authenticated, will suffice to demonstrate both motive and deceit. Saul said. He hid it well. The bureau files were cleaned out. Someone meant to erase him entirely. Someone with intelligence, Wolfe said, and access, which narrows the field. Mr. Goodwin, where is Mr. Vale? Still cosy at his townhouse. Saul saw him go in around 8, no lights on since. Either he's sleeping off a conscience or editing his alibi. Wolfe grunted. In either case, the chapter condemns him. The typing matches Greel's machine precisely. The ribbon impression spacing confirms it. I glanced at Saul. That means the copy Kramer saw, the one planted at Alice Ray's desk, was a fake. Indeed. Wolfe set the page flat on the desk blotter and regarded it like an adversary. A photostat, poorly done. The wax impression on that envelope had been reheated. The authentic blue wax melts at a lower temperature than common blends. This, he tapped the carbon, was printed before his death, proof that someone wished to frame me by counterfeiting both my seal and my sense. That's a new low, I said. Even murderers in this town can't leave our stationery alone. Saul's mouth twitched. What's the play, Wolfe? The play, Wolfe said slowly, is patience. Mr. Kramer has our Fritz, yes? Locked up downtown, I said. Stebbins is babysitting him. Kramer's convinced that Cufflink did more talking than a stool pigeon. Wolfe's jaw tightened. It was planted. This chapter will purchase Mr. Brenner's freedom as surely as if it were currency, but it must be presented with impeccable logic. Tomorrow at 10, Kramer will be here. You will telephone him, Archie, and insist he come before I send this to the Gazette. Lon Cohen will print it in full if I say the word. Blackmail? I said. You're picking up bad habits. He sighed. Leverage, Mr. Goodwin. Blackmail is crude. This, he gestured to the page, is elegant compulsion. Saul pocketed his hat. You'll want me to stay on Vale? Yes, tonight, discreetly. If he attempts to contact Mrs. Holt, inform me at once. Her part in this performance must end. Saul nodded once and vanished like a well-paid ghost. When the door clicked behind him, Wolfe sat back and poured himself a beer from the side table. The foam rose neatly. He didn't touch it. He stared at the golden head as if waiting for it to confess. I said, That's the first untouched beer I've seen in months. Either we've hit the apocalypse or you're worried. He turned those brown eyes on me, cool but not cold. I am, he hesitated, indignant. Fritz Brenner has served me faithfully for 2 decades. That his integrity is impugned by these imbeciles offends me profoundly. Then let's clear him, I said. You've got the goods. That chapter names the players, the motive, the whole blackmail scheme. Kramer's going to choke on it. Perhaps, Wolfe said, leaning back, but he must not suspect our advantage. He must see it unfold. Meaning you want me to keep acting dumb? He raised a brow. If that is not beyond your capacity, yes, I grinned. Flattery from you, boss, could qualify as a state holiday. He allowed a tiny smile, not enough to register in court, but real. Archie, I rely on your levity as ballast. The world presses heavily. I pretended to jot that down. I'll embroider it on a pillow. He closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them. Tomorrow we begin restoration of Mr. Brenner's name, of my dignity, and of logic itself. Now please file that document in the safe. I shall not have it breathed upon. I slid the carbon into an envelope, locked it in the steel cabinet, and turned the dial. Wolfe finally lifted the beer, examined the foam, and sipped. Acceptable, he muttered. The air was thick with the smell of orchids from the hall, faint and sweet. Outside, rain hissed against the windows again. It felt like the case itself, murky but breaking. I leaned back in my chair. Well, I said, if Greel wanted immortality, he's got it. Posthumous fame, with footnotes in handcuffs. Wolfe gave me one regal nod. Phooey, the only immortality that matters is truth recorded correctly. And tomorrow, Mr. Goodwin, we record it. By late afternoon, Kramer released Fritz pending further inquiry after reading the Guild chapter and Cohen's retraction. He came straight home to the kitchen like a man pardoned by reason. Part courtroom, part supper club, and all Nero Wolfe. If Solomon had ever presided over a murder case from behind a mahogany desk while Fritz polished beer glasses in the background, he'd have felt right at home. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, broad as a battleship and twice as silent, while I perched on the corner of the desk, checking the clock and wondering whether any of our guests would bring dessert or just damnation. We weren't hosting dinner, we were baiting it. The bait itself lay neatly arranged in a stack of cream-coloured envelopes on Wolfe's blotter, each one written in a hand that would have fooled its own author. Saul Pantzer had worked from Greel's old notes and samples until the mimicry was perfect. Wolfe examined the last one like a man appraising a new orchid hybrid. Excellent, he said finally. It would deceive even me, which is the only test worth passing. Then it's official, I said. We're committing literary forgery in the name of justice. Greel would have been proud. He shot me a glare over the rim of his beer glass. Do not profane this enterprise, Archie. We are restoring equilibrium, not courting irony. Sure, I said. Equilibrium, with a side of vengeance. Outside, the city was sliding toward evening, horns and drizzle weaving the usual Manhattan symphony. Inside, Wolfe had turned the office into a stage. The red leather client chair faced his desk dead center, framed by 2 others for balance. The lighting was deliberate, warm but unforgiving, the kind that makes sweat a moral issue. Fritz had delivered a small tray of sandwiches and 2 glasses of chilled beer at 6:45, then retreated to the kitchen like a man who'd survived judgment and didn't plan to tempt it again. Wolfe looked up from his notes. "You have spoken with Mr. Cohen?" "Yep." Lon ran the retraction. Headline reads, "Chef's name cleared. Investigation turns to literary world." He gave the cops enough rope to knit a sweater. "Good," Wolfe said, satisfaction curling through his voice. "Kramer may bluster, but even he knows better than to contend with the Gazette's appetite for scandal." "Speaking of appetite," I said, lifting my beer, "any chance we lure our guests with actual food? You're inviting men who measure status in menu courses. They might expect truffles." "Pfui, they will dine on consequences." That was Wolfe's version of a punchline. The plan, as he'd dictated that afternoon, was simple in theory. Anonymous invitations written in Greel's style, summoning the entire Culinary Guild board to an urgent private discussion regarding Chapter 10, at our address. Each envelope was sealed with a replica of Wolfe's infamous blue wax, which, if all went well, would provoke exactly one heart attack and a confession. The rest would merely squirm. At 8 o'clock sharp, the first arrival rang. Archie Goodwin, master of ceremonies, opened the door. Henry Vale came in wearing a smile that had been ironed on too tight. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "this is highly irregular." "So is murder," I said pleasantly, taking his coat. Behind him came two more, a banker type whose cufflinks glittered like gilt, and a nervous sous chef whose hands still smelled of onions. Within 15 minutes, we had 6 men and 1 lady seated like jurors in a play they didn't know was a tragedy. Vivian Holt arrived last, wrapped in mink and frost, eyes sharp enough to slice soufflé. Wolfe let the silence ripen before speaking. "You have all received identical communications, each, I presume, written in a hand you recognize." The room twitched. Vale's eyes darted to the envelope in his pocket. The banker shifted. Only Vivian Holt remained poised, crossing her legs with deliberate grace. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Wolfe?" she asked. "The meaning," Wolfe said, his voice a low thunder, "is that a man is dead, another falsely accused, and I mean to identify the author of both offences. You, madam and gentlemen, are here because you formed the board of the Culinary Guild. You dined together, you schemed together, and one among you murdered Jonas Greel." That landed like a plate dropped from a great height. I took my cue and stepped forward with a small tray. On it sat one of the forged invitations, still sealed. "This," I said, "was written in Greel's hand, or so it appears. But we know Greel didn't write it. He was already dead when the ink dried, so whoever flinches next has a steady diet of guilt." It was almost too easy. Vale's fingers twitched, brushing the inside pocket of his jacket. Wolfe's eyes followed the movement. "Mr. Vale," he said softly, "your courage appears culinary, half-baked." Vale tried a smirk. "You're bluffing. Anyone could have—" "Pfui!" Wolfe's bellow shook the room. "The wax, sir, was your undoing. Only one among you had access to my seal before it was returned to me. That man dined here last year to discuss the Guild's contract with the City Food Council. You admired my correspondence habits and, without my notice, pocketed a flake of blue wax from my tray. It was sufficient to mould a forgery." Vale went pale. "You can't prove that." "Archie." I handed him the photo Saul had taken. Vale entering Vivian Holt's townhouse the night after Greel's murder. Wolfe let it fall on the desk like a verdict. Vivian rose. "Henry," she hissed, "you fool!" He turned on her, desperate. "You were in on it. You wanted the Guild's files destroyed." The room dissolved into argument. Wolfe lifted a hand and silence fell again as if by gravitational pull. "Enough. Miss Holt, you will compose yourself. Mr. Vale, I advise you to remain seated until the inspector arrives. Mr. Goodwin, telephone Mr. Kramer." I grinned. Gladly. He loves midnight social calls. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed, the faintest ghost of triumph on his face. "Justice," he said, "is best served at 8:30, while the guilty still digest." By the time I returned from the phone, Vale had slumped in his chair, staring at his own hands. Vivian Holt sat rigid, her poise cracked at the edges. Fritz appeared silently at the doorway with a tray, a gesture of habit, if not necessity. Wolfe nodded to him softly. "You are exonerated, Fritz, and indispensable." "Thank you, sir," Fritz said quietly, his dignity intact. When the doorbell rang again, Kramer, punctual as wrath, I turned to Wolfe. "You know," I said, For a man who hates disorder, you sure make it look elegant." He closed his eyes. "Archie, spare me your epigrams." But I caught the flicker of satisfaction that passed his face like a candle flame. For Wolfe, that was practically a smile.